Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Conscious Grief series. I am with Randi Pearlman Wolfson today. Randi is a Los Angeles-based grief educator and author. After experiencing the death of her dad when she was 10 years old, it became her lifelong dream to provide hope, healing to grieving children and adults. For nearly 20 years, she has educated the community, including mental health professionals, clergy, students, teachers, and various other professionals on the topic of grief. She is a true expert. Thank you so much for being here, Randi.
It's my pleasure. I'm so glad to be with you.
Yes, and we met some years ago, and you trained me to become a grief facilitator, a grief group facilitator, Randi. So it's really just special, to be sitting with you right now.
And a wonderful one that you are.
Yes, and well, thanks to you and your incredible Instagram page, which is how we came across one another again in the last year.
Yeah, thank goodness for Instagram, huh?
Yes. So tell us about Grief and Grits and how that started.
Grief and Grits came about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago. I had left my job in grief support, working in the world of grief support, and just felt like I still wanted to be able to offer up education and kind of use the experience that I had had as a grieving child and into adulthood, and kind of combine those two things and hopefully provide a space that might resonate for people, that maybe something I had to say would kind of reach into their hearts and help others find a way to express their grief. And so that was how I started on Facebook, and then I added Instagram. And I started in August, and I hoped that by the end of the year, maybe 50 people would follow along. And now I just hit 10,000 on Instagram and over 13,000 on Facebook. And what that means to me is that somehow, if my words have resonated, for people enough to come by and maybe keep coming by just to help their hearts, like, as I said, then that just means the world to me. So it's been a really wonderful experience. The grief community on social media is so wonderful, supportive, and compassionate. So it's really been a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and it is. It's just amazing what you're providing for people through social media. And I think that for all its faults, that we can waste a lot of time looking at meaningless things, when it comes to the grief community, it's been phenomenally supportive. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It is amazing because, sometimes I think, oh, social media, but I don't think I could leave. I just, it's such a wonderful community. And, if it sparks one person or two people, to find some comfort or seek out more help, it's just so meaningful. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And I know that we share a kind of similar story in a sense, because we both lost our dads at a similar age.
Yes.
And well, first of all, tell us about your father.
My dad, well, when he died, he was 41 years old. Kind of looked like really an example of a healthy, good-looking, great shape kind of guy. He was an athlete. He was a gymnast. Never smoked. Didn't drink. Seemingly so healthy. And at about the age of 37 and a half, he contracted leukemia and was sick for with it for 3.5 years until he died when he was 41. He was a school teacher, a very beloved school teacher, 4th and 5th grade. I have great memories of him bringing me to his classroom to meet all his kids. And he would come home and grade papers, and he would hand over the red pencil. In those days, that's how you graded papers. And he would, allow me to, make an X or a C. And I felt lucky because he came home early every day as a school teacher. And so my mom and dad, chose not to tell my brother and myself that he was sick. He died in 1966, and nobody knew how to talk about death and grief at all. And so I think he, wanted to continue to be as normal as possible. And so only a few people knew that he was very ill. So the day that he died, for me, it was like a sudden death because I had no idea. Well, I say I had no idea, but I believe that kids have a pretty good sense of, what's going on in a home. And I'm sure there was this, fight for life going on in my home. And I'm sure I had to have sensed something. But with no information, really, for me, it was like a sudden death the day he died. And so, I've lived with grief for nearly 56 years. And it just means the world to me to be able to talk about that and what it's like to have been a childhood griever and what that's like leading into adulthood and helping people to understand that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's something that I've been intrigued to ask yourself. Because when we have a bereavement as a child, it can take many years for us to really pull it apart, if you like, or begin to grieve. Would you agree? I mean, I think we're grieving in our own way, but sort of, if you like, conscious of it, maybe.
Yes. And I like to say, today there's so much wonderful opportunity for children to really access their grief through grief support groups and camps and therapy, all kinds of resources all over the internet, books, and so many different ways for children to be able to access their grief and begin to understand it from the moment they become a griever. What's important to understand, though, is that as children grow and their brains develop and they reach different stages in their development, they will come to understand and know their grief in a very different way. And but often if children don't have any opportunity to begin processing their grief, then yes, I think it can take many, many years. And I have talked about this on my Facebook and Instagram page about it. Probably the first time I think I really started to process and begin to understand my grief and how it was affecting me as an adult was probably about 12 years later. Yeah. I'd say in my early 20s when I first began to get an inkling that, this death had an effect on me and I better start to take a look at that. Yeah. How about for you, Tara? I'm curious for you when that began.
I think I shut it away for such a long time because my dad died at 9 and then my mother died at 21. And as a 21-year-old just beginning adulthood, I just wanted to be fine and I wanted to enjoy myself. And I didn't want anything to sort of hold me up from moving forwards. So I think it really took me until my early 30s. I started having some therapy in my late 20s because it was like I was always having difficulty in relationship.
Mm.
Probably still am. So I was seeing a therapist for that, but she never, and a few different people I've seen never really nailed it down to grief, actually.
Mm.
But I did do a workshop in my early 30s called The Awakening, and I just was in floods of tears the whole time. And I think that was the beginning of opening my heart and feeling, because I was so numb. I was so numb for so many years.
Oh, absolutely. You know, to have the grief after the death of your mom on top of what you experienced as a little girl, that's so much for a heart to hold. And you know, I think it's so true when you say, you know, at the age of 21, you just want to feel like a young adult, you know, beginning your life. And um, what is wonderful, I just want to mention about that is now today there are so many grief groups for young adults, so that young adults who are at, you know, same age, same stage of life can come together and talk about that. And so that's a really wonderful thing too, and so important. Even on college campuses now, there are a lot of grief support groups, so that while in school, people have a place to connect and process that. So,
and I think that there's going to be always a number of people who say internally, like, I haven't really got time for this right now, you know, and I'll get to it later in life, which is completely fine as well. And I think that it's never too late to grieve. And I think sometimes we can put ourselves under pressure, like, God, that was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, like that. It can't be that's my issue.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to address what you said about like the therapist or a couple of therapists who never equated what you were going through with grief. And you know, I've often said every doctor, every lawyer, every accountant, anybody who has you fill out some sort of an intake should ask the question, have you experienced a death in your life, either recent or in the past? Because how important is that information to have, you know, especially for a therapist or your doctor should have that information. And I find it striking that it's not. And imagine, you know, going to a therapist who you think would, you know, that would be one of the very first questions that a therapist would be asking. And it is important to understand that not every therapist is prepared or understands how to address grief. Mm-hmm. And that should not be taken for granted.
Yeah. And again, I do think that we're gaining so much more awareness so quickly now. So hopefully those things will be start to be addressed.
Yes.
So when you were an adult, what things started to sort of manifest in your life, which you thought, oh, I need to address this grief from my father who died when I was 10?
Yeah, I think probably, well, in my early 20s, I think it was the first time I began to address it because I was going through my master's program to become a marriage and family therapist. And of course, you know, you begin to address a lot of things about yourself. You're trying to understand more about yourself so that you can be a good therapist. And so I think at that time, a lot was triggered. And that was the beginning of me really beginning to explore this thing of grief and how that was affecting me. And then I think I put it on hold a little bit because it is a lot to deal with when you're trying to become the person that you're becoming. And as you said, you know, you just want to be, you just want to have fun in your 20s, right? And grow and have fun and not be weighted down by so much pain. So I think it began there. And then I think in my early 30s, again, I was addressing my grief in a new and different way, I was very aware of having nightmares about my dad. And, the funny thing is, I can't tell you today what the nightmare was, but I know it was reoccurring and it was scary. And so I knew I had to, again, address my grief. And I had the most wonderful therapist who at some point said, I hadn't been to my dad's grave in many, many, many years. And she said, I think it would be valuable to go and just be there at his grave and talk. And I think it's going to be valuable for you. And she said, and I was terrified, just terrified. And she said, I will meet you there. And I was flabbergasted, quite frankly, that somebody would do that for me. And the day came and it was pouring rain, just pouring. And nobody in LA likes to drive in rain like that. And I was sure that there was just no way she would meet me there. And sure enough, she called me and she said, Randi, I'll be there. And it was unbelievable. And she just sat with me while I sobbed and talked to my dad. And lo and behold, it was after that experience that the nightmares went away. So it helped me to process whatever that was that I, was needing at that moment in time. And I've shared this story on my page, my Grief and Grits page, because I want people to know that it is never too late, like you said, to address our grief. And that, we need to have just that one person, either a therapist or one good friend or a family member or a grief support group, wherever we can find just someone to really literally sit by our side and help us know that we're not alone and that we can go to the deepest depths of where we need to go. And I know that that's not always possible for everybody. And sometimes people come to an Instagram or Facebook page and feel their hearts can be held there too. And that's okay. Wherever you can find some place to know that you're not completely alone, it can make such a difference in the ability to process our grief.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I really enjoy about your Instagram page is learning about your father, and you bring him into your work. And I, for myself, feel that even since the pandemic, I've really been reconnecting with my father, and I have written about him and shared about him. And that's one of the really wonderful parts of grieving, is that we can continue the relationship and continue talking about them, which I never felt comfortable with, I suppose, for many years.
Yeah. And you have written beautifully about your dad, and it's so meaningful and such a joy to, for me to get to know that part of you, that what you shared with your dad, and to know more about your dad helps me know more about you. And it's really wonderful. And I think what's so important too is that, for so many years, the thought was, move on, get over, stop talking, put pictures away, get rid of things, and oh my gosh, that's so painful. And thank goodness we do know now that continuing a relationship and continuing to talk and keep pictures and keep funny little trinkets that are meaningful, how important that is. And gosh, it just makes such a big difference in how we grieve and how we can grow and move through the pain.
I know, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that especially going through our loved ones' things and feeling like if we're sort of efficient, effective people, then we will be compartmentalizing their things and giving them to charity shops, as we call them here, and I regret slightly not keeping more things of my parents. I have to say, I think I guess I modeled my mum, because my mum did everything very quickly. My sister is much better than me, but has retained more items of theirs, which I'm grateful for now, because I get to enjoy them at her house. But I do say that to people now, like, really take your time. Don't feel like you have to be super organized in this matter.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's so important to give people permission, because people feel funny, like, why am I still holding on to these things? And gosh, having run grief support groups, you hear all kinds of things of what people save and scents, people's t-shirts and pajamas and combs and toothbrushes and anything they can, because it helps us to feel closer to someone.
Yeah.
And it's so important to be given permission to do that, and to know that you're not strange for doing that.
Exactly, because I think other people can make you feel strange, or make you feel like you're not getting on with your grief because you've still got their room as it was, or their clothes, or whatever it may be.
Or you're still wearing a wedding ring.
Yeah.
It can take a long time, or maybe never, for people to remove. So, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking, actually, when my mum died, I kept thinking, what am I going to do with her phone number in my phone? And eventually I lost my phone, and that was taken care of. But I remember for such a long time thinking about that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big one.
Shifting gears slightly, I really want to share about the book that you've written, because well, you talk about it. I think it's a wonderful thing to talk about.
Well, I always keep a copy right next to me, so I'll hold it up. This is Eddie's Brave Journey: How One Little Elephant Learned All About Grief. Eddie sort of just popped into my head a few years ago. This little elephant, the whole story unfolded really right, all in one fell swoop. And I just wanted to have a book that would be for real little grievers. And so I say that it's for 3 to 8, but I think really the book is the kind of, because the illustrations are just beautiful and engaging. And so I think somebody could sit a little, a baby, when you start to sit a baby on your lap and read books, that this is a book that you can sit a baby on your lap and read and look at the animals. And because Eddie is a little grieving elephant whose grandpa died, his grandpa Joe. And so he goes from animal to animal to learn what to do with his really big feelings. And so each animal I researched each of their personalities so that I could make sure that the personality of that particular animal was offering up some sort of a lesson, an idea of what Eddie could do with things that he was feeling. And also in the book, there's a little squirrel who is Eddie's best friend, and his name is Solly Squirrel, and he's named for my dad, who was Sol, and his nickname was Solly. And Solly Squirrel in the book is like a teacher, and he goes along with Eddie, and the character of the squirrel actually engages with the reader and asks particular questions. So if Eddie is looking to find out what to do because he feels mad, then Solly Squirrel looks at the reader on the page, is looking at the reader and asking, what do you do when you feel mad? So it really helps the caregiver or parent that's reading the book with the child open up conversation. And what I do with the book is what I like to call real language. I use the word died. I don't shy away from that. I explain what that means, that the body has stopped working. And I don't use any religious references because I think it's really important for each family that reads the book to bring in whatever is appropriate for them. If they do believe in heaven, if they don't believe in heaven. So there's no reference either way, so that parents and caregivers can have that conversation in any way that they feel appropriate. And so I just, this book really is like my baby. It really means the world to me. I've gotten lovely feedback about it, which makes me feel so good. And I think it touches adults' hearts as well. I cry every time I read it still. And so I think it's a wonderful book that adults and children can share, can come back to. And as I said, really for any age, because, you know, even if a child doesn't yet understand the concept of death, it's important to start talking about it, you know?
It really is. Like you say, for many years we were so avoidant, and it's part of life. And why not talk about it and start talking about it when children are young?
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many, you know, wonderful opportunities to open the conversation around death. You know, even if a bug dies, a goldfish, you know, a pet, you know, might be a first death that a child experiences. So there's lots of wonderful opportunities to begin the conversation.
Yeah, and it's a really special tribute to your dad's soul as well that you've.
It is. Yeah. I just knew that somehow he had to be, you know, a part of the book. And you know, it's funny because when I've done other presentations about the book, every time I have somebody teach me something about the characters in the book that I hadn't even really realized myself when I was doing it. For example, somebody said to me, "Oh, you used an elephant because grief is like the elephant in the room." And I thought, oh yeah, that's right. I used an elephant because I thought it was adorable. And because elephants do grieve, by the way, they have done research on elephants, you know, where they will gather around together around a dead body of another elephant. And so that's, I think, one of the main reasons that it popped into my head. But I loved that somebody said that to me, and somebody actually pointed out to me that Solly Squirrel in the book was like a teacher, like my dad. I just thought he was going to be Eddie's best friend going along for the ride. And so somebody taught me that. And then one more thing that somebody taught me was they said, "Oh, I love that Eddie goes to all these different animals and learns that he's not alone in what he's feeling, and that each animal understands and offers up an idea of what to do with those feelings." And so Eddie learns that he's not alone in his grief and can go around to others. And I hadn't really thought about it that way. And so it's kind of been a wonderful experience to share the book and get that kind of feedback given to me to understand my book even better. So it's been fun.
And people we'll put a link at the bottom of this for people to find out more about.
Wonderful. It's just eddiesbravejourney.com, or if you come to my page, Grief and Grits, it's in the link in my bio. So
yeah, because that's a great gift for somebody. And I keep thinking when I come to America, I'm going to buy a bunch of them. So I will do that. Wonderful. And I wanted to ask you, in your personal grief for your father, does it still come back to you now? Like, do you have grief bursts about your dad this many years later?
Absolutely. And in the strangest places and in the strangest ways, or most unexpected ways. I was once at the market and I was looking at some lettuce in a bag, and I saw the date was his birthday. August, the expiration date was his birthday. And boom, the tears just came flooding. There I was in the middle of Trader Joe's, I think, and it was so surprising. I hadn't expected it. And, watching a movie or, hearing a song about a week ago or couple weeks ago, a song came on the radio that was from in the 60s, and we used to sing it together. And there I was, the tears flooding. But it's okay. And it feels good in a way, because I feel connected to him. And because I was only 10, and maybe you can relate to this too, being so young when your dad died, I don't have a lot of memory. But there are certain things that just boom, hit me: a song, a smell, a date. And so when they do, they hit really hard, because I think there are so few memories that I have. And what I've learned is that that's okay, and to really kind of allow my heart to go with it. And because it connects me to him, and that feels good. So and I think that's what grief is. I think it's feeling sadness and joy together. And I know a lot of people say you can feel joy along with grief. I say joy is a part of grief. And I like that. I think it's really important to understand that joy and sorrow and confusion and worry and fear, it's all a part of what makes up grief.
Right.
And I think the more that we can understand that, and the more we can allow for all of that, the more we understand our grief and can feel it and know it's okay.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I often ask people what they interpret conscious grief to be. I feel like you just said it like that.
Yeah. I love the term conscious grief. Oh my gosh, that's just beautiful. And how can we just wrap our hearts and arms around that and know that it's okay? And that's what I feel like my whole page, Grief and Grits, is really about. Because I'm a 56-year griever, I feel like that's what I can best offer to people, is to know that here I am 56 years later, and I can still melt to the ground and feel it, and it's okay. It's okay. And not only is it okay, I think it's imperative.
Right. Yeah. Oh, Randi, it is just so wonderful speaking to you. I could.
Oh, you too, Tara.
Thank you for all of your wisdom and generosity and love and everything that you do for the grieving community, and giving up your time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my honor. And I just respect and love what you're doing, and appreciate you so much. And it's a joy really to spend this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And to everybody that's been watching, thank you to you as well.